What's up? So today we're here with Rouel. He is the Student Life Coordinator at UHWO, and we're here to ask him a few questions about his Filipino culture and heritage. So, Rouel, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
We just want to ask, how much Filipino are you?
How much Filipino are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a really good question. Only because the short, quick answer I would tell you, I would say I'm like 99% Filipino with the sprinkling of Spanish, right?
Okay.
That's what I would tell you. But after learning about my history, learning about our ancestors, and really the term Filipino is really a colonized term to kind of refer to our people. So that term is not really necessarily the right way to really identify our ancestors, in which come from this archipelago that has over 7,100 islands. And so to refer to this country, to this nation, or my motherland, as one would say, as the Filipinos, which the term Filipinos came from King Philip II of Spain, which is not necessarily the true meaning and the name of the Philippines. And one should know that the Philippines has been colonized for 400 plus years. So to understand the layers and the complexities of which I understand the term Filipino, one must be rooted in understanding the context of which the terminology have been imposed on us. Unfortunately, I don't know what is the native name to refer to us to. That's one thing that I've yet to learn about. And so if we were to undo the 400 plus years, what would that look like? Or what would we call ourselves? And that's what I'm trying to still explore, because there is that component of native and indigenous piece that has been there before the Spaniards and before the introduction of Christianity, which is very similar, close to the indigenous ways, is very close to the native Hawaiian way of living now. So, or back then. And so if I were to say how much Filipino am I now, Filipino is a colonized term. And to make sense of it, I would have to also recognize my ways of living that culture, and yet at the same time understanding how much I yearn for understanding the native and indigenous ways. So in a previous conversation, I would tell or answer someone is, yes, I have to understand there's this colonized Filipino self, but yet this other side of yearning to understand what is the indigenous native Filipino.
Interesting. Based on that, then I guess there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in looking back at the history. And I'm just curious, if they were to find some information and that were to be surfaced and figure out maybe there's a correct term to identify Filipinos, would they still, I'm wondering if we would, based on that information that we find, that we discover, would we go on that, or would we still remain calling ourselves Filipinos just based on what has already occurred?
You know, it depends, because if right now within Filipinos you break it down ethnically, linguistically, and by tribes and mountain people, there still exists the Ifugao, the Igoro, the Negritos, and a lot of those are indigenous native communities still in existence and still thriving in the Philippines, though not as much or as populous as the Tagalogs, the Iloco, the Cebuanos, the Kapampangans, and many other the folks in Mindanao too. There's so much rich diversity in terms of the people in the Philippines, or our ancestors, or our people. And so to look at the demographics and geography of the Philippines is really, we need to take a look and really recognize for a minute the rich diversity that really exists in this one country, and the different types of people that exist. You have your mountainous, you have the mountain people, you have all these other types of people that does exist, but yet what the uniting umbrella is Filipino.
Right.
I guess one would say, yes, that's the uniting umbrella, but there's a lot of political history or political things behind that, and so that's the tough piece, because essentially those in government who gets to define things ultimately has the ultimate power to define who says what.
Right.
The national language of the Philippines is Filipino, which is based on Tagalog.
Okay.
Right? But at the same time, there's a lot of speakers who speak Ilocano.
Right.
And there's a lot of speakers who speak Cebuano. So then to say one language is
dominant
over the other, and that's a lot of things I have yet to learn, especially in that territory within the Philippines that I'm so not connected to and not well versed, that and understanding from a distance the complexities when talking about when someone or some group is trying to unify all of its people, or is that form of unifying people is also a term of colonization. So that's the balance of it. While there's more Tagalog speakers, but there's as much as Ilocano speakers, and so the balance of power, or for the balance for power or recognition, is much needed. And so how do we create a governance that allows for the embracing of all these cultures? It seems like, and so this is a critique of the government in which it yearns to be like a Western power, like the United States, right? But now we're getting a little bit into the politics. But all of this ties back to one's identity, I like to think. How do we situate ourselves? How do we fully identify? And so I think for myself, having to identify, I will at some point just identify with the colonized term of Filipino, but added the local piece.
Okay.
Identify as local Filipino, but yet the term local is also political too. If you understand the history of the islands, I guess for me is to make certain to identify local, that I was born here, I was raised here. But after taking courses and understanding the word local, that term also masks the role of which indigenous groups, such as Native Hawaiians, have made this their home. So what am I doing by calling myself local? Other people have also called settlers, right? Do I identify as a settler? And so this whole idea of identity is a really nice, complex issue.
It is, definitely.
As we try to understand one's identity in relation to the world. And it depends on the context too, where how you want to identify. If you want to identify yourself when meeting with a group of people in the continental United States, as opposed to meeting a group of people here who are born and raised here. So part of it is having to identify based on the context of which people will then understand you. What's the common language within the people that is around you that common people will fully understand?
Okay.
I like to think. So this might be a totally different approach from many other people. But I think here, if I'm talking to somebody else, like you, to other people outside in the community, I would kind of term myself as a local Filipino.
Interesting. Okay, I think you kind of answered my second question, because I was going to ask you about how would you identify yourself as a Filipino or American Filipino, because you were born here in the United States. And I guess a good way of looking at identity too is looking back to practices, the culture, and the biggest thing is what we're focusing on is food. Right, so this is the fun part, and there's a lot of Filipino dishes, right, and very delicious dishes.
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is, what are some foods that you eat at home that may have been, passed down through your family's generation? What maybe is your favorite dish?
Okay, what is fascinating, especially in the household. So before, as you can honestly see right now, Filipino food has finally made it in terms of for the rest of the community to kind of take notice. Only now the rest of the community is taking note of the flavors and the types of food, with the ube, with the
and when you mean community, you mean like all of Hawaii, or
all of Hawaii.
Okay.
Beyond our families, our homes, because in our homes we were just accustomed to the types of Filipino foods that our parents have been cooked. But as of late, within the last 5 to 10 years, you see emergence of Filipino food that have been innovatively done, innovatively creative dishes that brings different twists to this Filipino concept or the Filipino taste.
Okay.
And so, but so just so fascinating to see how it has kind of uprooted and uplifted, I guess, our community, especially with young entrepreneurs who is kind of taking a look at, their roots, but also making sense with their Americanness or their localness. And so I see them trying to marry the two,
Okay.
with a fusion of some sort. So, but growing up, I would say the foods growing up as opposed to what was sold, what is cooked in restaurants, is very different. In the restaurants, early restaurants before the new wave of new entrepreneurs introduced new dishes, we seen a lot of kind of, I'm gonna critique a little bit our foods. We seen a little bit the oily foods, I don't want to call it fatty foods, but just really rich in oils. But growing up, we were raised with eating a lot of Filipino vegetables, in soups, with fish, in sinigang. And sinigang is a soupy dish. Soupy dish with fish. The base of the soup is tamarind or salamagi. And there's different flavors in there, with different vegetables. Then my mom would make these different type of soupy dishes that just have not beets. I'm trying to think of the Filipino word or terms. Utong, which is the beans, cut. And so I see different Filipino foods, from my perspective, really in the home that was healthy, very different from what we see in the restaurants. And a lot of our foods actually came from our backyard, or actually food from our backyard, or the backyard from our other family friends. So it was interesting that we got our foods growing up by actually trading of what we have. We, families who had a lot more of lasuna or green onions would share that. Other families who would have tomatoes would share that. Other people would have bitter melon, would share that. Paria would share that. Or what is that tree? Kalamungay tree. Take those branches and that fruit, share that as well. So it was interesting how that practice continued on here, from the I'm assuming from the Philippines, where you just trade what you have so that you have you have those type of foods to eat. So foods that I do love, of that was made, I have two. A lot of other food is really good, but one of the things that I request for my birthday especially is balatong, which is mungo beans. And it's like it's mungo beans. How do I describe it? It's like thick, not really soupy, but wet type of a dish. But my mom places chicharron or pork inside, and it's really good. In addition to that, so that would be like a nice lunch or dinner type of thing. A must-have breakfast item,
You think so?
is torta.
Torta.
Torta is a must-have breakfast item, which is an eggplant with egg. So it's like, if you think about meat John, but done with the eggplant. So your eggplant is your meat, and you dip it with your egg and you cook it. So that's one of my go-tos.
Awesome.
In terms of favorite Filipino foods, there's a lot to mention.
There's a lot, definitely.
Yeah.
And I've eaten both of those dishes, and the eggplant with egg dish, I didn't know it was called. What is it called again?
Torta.
For me, I grew up just knowing, I want the eggplant with the egg. And I used to eat it for breakfast too, and actually any time of the day is really good. But it's it's quick to make. It's one of those foods that you can have done in about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's a good snack as well.
Yeah, and I think one more thing to add to it. So like I talk about like dinner item, like a breakfast item, and I think a good cooling item is, everyone has their own version to their halo halo. And so my version to the halo halo is very basic, because my mom makes it all based on the resources that we have. And so the resources that are based on the items that I like in the halo halo, and it's again based on what I was raised with. So the basics for a halo halo is your carnation milk, your carnation evaporation milk, or your condensed milk mixed. And the other two items that I only request is coconut and avocado. And that for me is simply the best. And what makes it extra special is we get our coconut grown in the yard. So we don't get the coconut grown elsewhere, but we get the coconut grown in our backyard. So that's an extra treat to kind of treat for us, where we can really enjoy the items, the foods that is actually raised and grown in our backyards.
Awesome.